Welcome
to
the
European
Institute for
Asian Studies.
My name's John Street. I'm from the University of East Anglia, where I teach on politics and mass media, but I'm accompanied by my colleagues from there and many of our students who are working on an MA program on media and society. And I welcome them and obviously all of you too. We are also here not just because of the subjects we study, but also because UEA, University of East Anglia, is connected with other universities, particularly in Belgium, on a project funded by the European Union called C-Media. And it is creating an online TV platform, which is advertised here, in case you want to see, as part of this EU funding. And that is also why we're here in Brussels. I'm just going to say a very few words of introduction. It seems to me we have such a distinguished panel that the last thing you need to be listening to is me. So I'm going to be very brief. But I do want to say three things about the topic which we're addressing, which is bridging the gap between EU and Asia in media terms. And the first thing is, obviously, is the importance of image. Now, I don't know any of you personally, but I wouldn't mind betting that all of us checked ourselves in the mirror before we left for work or whatever this morning, because we were worried about how we would look and how people might respond to the way we looked. In my case, my wife has to check the way I look before I'm allowed out of the house. But the reason is, of course, because that image is so important to the way people react to us. And of course, what we're dealing with today is the way in which national images, and indeed the images of entire continents and so forth, are received and understood, affect profoundly relations between nations and relations between people. And one of the things that is so important to what we're doing today is the thought that those images, and particularly those images that are communicated via our media, affect the distribution of resources, they affect the treatment of peoples, they affect foreign policy, and a whole range of other phenomena that follow from those images. So that's the first, and it seems to me, important reason why we're gathered together to talk about this. The second, of course, is that what we know about those images, particularly perhaps as they relate to the EU and Asia, is the mixture of perception and misperception that goes into it. My colleague Li Zhang here from UEA has contributed to some of the research that has allowed us to see some of those perceptions and misperceptions that affect relations between the EU and Asia. And many of you as students have already started looking closely at how, particularly in Britain, various other parts of the world are represented. So it seems to me there is much that we know, but much more we need to know about those perceptions and misperceptions. And the third thing that seems to me important just to bear in mind is how we explain why those perceptions or misperceptions persist. It seems to, as someone who teaches in this area, there are kind of four very general explanations. One, which is that they are the product, those perceptions and the media's representations of them are products of the foreign policies of the countries from which those media derive. But equally, there is argument that actually, no, it isn't the governments who determine how media represent that world, but actually the media organizations and the investment of resources that those media organizations put into foreign correspondence and foreign bureaus and so forth. And then there are others who say, no, it's neither those things, it's actually more about how journalists work and the practices of journalists and how those differ across different countries and in different parts of the world. And that this is the explanation. And there's a final, I think, explanation that we often offer for the way in which perceptions of the world are organized, and that's us as consumers of those media and the expectations we make of those organizations and the way we express our tastes in what newspapers we buy and so on and so forth, and how we respond, I should mention it, to things like the Eurovision Song Contest. It happens this weekend, as you may know, in which various European nations desperately try to represent themselves in very particular ways in pop terms. So it seems to me, for those sort of three reasons, that images matter, there are many gaps in our knowledge about those perceptions and how they come about and what they consist of and why they are, that it seems very important to have the opportunity to talk about them today.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me here to share my thoughts and observations on this topic. Let me say a few words about myself. I joined the Chinese Foreign Service back in the year of 1997. I started my career as an interpreter and translator, and then I was shifted to the Department of Press and Public Diplomacy in 2002. And then I've been there for almost 10 years, and before I was posted to this position. I came here on 2nd of March, so I've just been here for 2 months and more, a little. So my working experience for the past few years with media is not sufficient to make me an expert in this subject. But I will be more than happy to welcome you make comments or interventions when you feel that I might be mistaken sometimes. So let me just, I prepared a small PowerPoint for you if you would like. I think it is true that Asia and Europe are highly interdependent and highly complementary in their pursuit of economic recovery and sustained development. If you take a further look at the slides, you will find out that Asia-Pacific region has become central to the EU's growth prospects. It has the largest and fastest growing economies, not necessarily the largest, the fastest growing economies, and it is among the fastest growing export markets to Europe. Right now, Asia, the people in Asia buy almost a quarter of exports and provide over 30% of EU imports, which makes Asia the largest trading partner of EU. And for Asian countries, EU is the most important trading partner in terms of exports and imports, outperforming the United States. And EU is also a major investor in Asia. Nearly 20% of EU outward investment goes to Asia. So that means that Asia and Europe needs each other. The EU needs Asian markets, and Asia also needs Europe's expertise and high-tech products. Apart from their economic interdependence, Asia and the EU are also important players in international arenas, and they also jointly contributed to global initiatives, be it political or development agenda. Having said that, the reality is not always comprehensively reflected in the media coverage. I think most of us are familiar with the study done by Professor Martin Holland and his team. From his study, which he surveyed more than 20 Asian countries, including ROK, Japan, China, Malaysia, Singapore, and several others, they found out, and they also monitored the EU daily coverage by 21 reputable national papers and 7 television channels. And the result he has found out is the EU had very limited coverage amongst Asian media before the European debt crisis. So this is really a bad news, but for the EU side, they are also good news as well. Well, let's talk about the bad news first. And I think, according to his survey, the most striking finding was for television. The EU was virtually invisible on the Asian television news, with China an exception. I will come back to that later. So elsewhere on the most popular national Asian primetime broadcasts, the EU was never mentioned more than 4 times a month. So a significant number of people in Asia is likely to have, at best, just a passing and obscure understanding of the importance of the EU internationally. So this is the reality before the European debt crisis. Now here comes the good news. The EU is now very much in the news. Also in Asia, admittedly not always for the good reasons. That's the result, the findings of the EIAS last year report on EU's engagement in the Asia Pacific. The concern expressed in Asian public opinions and media about EU's own debt crisis is proof of our growing economic interdependence. Well, actually, when we were making contacts with our European counterparts or even European students, we are always asked, how does Asia and China view Europe during the crisis or after the debt crisis? It seems that people are quite concerned, or there is a certain degree of worries that EU might be negatively viewed because of the debt crisis. But again, there is good news to you. The survey found out that the overall evaluation showed that 70% of the media reportage during the crisis portrayed the EU from a neutral perspective. Only 11% of the EU news carried an explicitly negative assessment of the EU's actions. Interesting enough, during the crisis, the actions of the EU and its institutions were evaluated more positively than negatively. This intriguing situation could be explained by the fact that newsmakers assigned a lot of negative evaluations to the misfortunes and misgivings of the individual member states themselves, while EU was presented as an actor who could offer some solutions and assistance. And again, there are also good news from the Chinese perspective. As I mentioned earlier, China is an exception in the media report about EU. If you take a further look at the reports, you will find that the EU reportages appear roughly 12 times a month in China, in Chinese media, between the year of 2006 and 2011. And this suggests that the EU gets a more prominent profile in the eyes of the general Chinese news audiences compared with other populations in Asia. And especially thanks to Commissioner de Hoort recent days, I think you may have already noticed that the EU, today as well, the EU now becomes even more visible in China because of the average of for more than 47% of the tariffs to be levied on Chinese solar panels. So, so they are good news for the EU. While as on the Asian part, the picture is not so rosy. I couldn't find the report of the survey done by Professor Holland, the Asia in the eyes of EU, but I can share with you some of the statistics done by another scholar, Mr. Dennis Pumning. He's the CEO and founder of the 21st Century Frontiers, director of the Low Carbon Leaders Project under the UN Global Compact. He launched a study on China and on how China is portrayed, based on 100 covers of leading global magazines such as The Economist, Time, Newsweek, and The Spiegel. And the main result of this study is striking. Over the 100 covers, 44% portray China as hostile, and 16% portray China as not open to dialogue. 19% portray China as neutral. Only 16% portray China as open to dialogue. And most of the covers use dragon to portray China as aggressive and destructive. And this is only the picture of China, which I noticed that the notice issued by EIAS mentioned that China is almost at the forefront among the EU media coverage, which means that China gets the most coverage from the perspective of EU media reports. So what about others? The situation is even worse. So I guess the current way of portraying each other as hostile to dialogue could present a challenge in the future if this current situation is not addressed. So there are gaps. The gaps is by no means small. And there are reasons for the gaps. But my analysis is so far not very academic, I'm afraid. I think from the perspective of ordinary Chinese audience, I think the reasons can be attributed to lack of knowledge, lack of interest, because people turn to think things happen afar, are not directly related to their daily lives. And for the EU side, there is also reason because of lack of simplicity. lack of efficiency. For those who are in the business of diplomacy, it makes us confused. Like, can you answer these questions? How many European countries are members of the EU? How many of them are in the EU zone? Which country will be the rotating presidency in the later half of this year? And who is going to be joining the EU in this coming July? And what role does the Treaty of Rome, Brussels, the Maastricht Treaty, the Amsterdam Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty play in EU's integration? And can you list the institutions of the EU, their mandate, their functions? And what's the difference between the European Council and the Council of the EU? And there are how many members are there in the EP, and how they get elected, and for how long, and how many parties do they represent? And these are all the questions for the diplomats find very hard to answer. So it is, and sometimes even the diplomats are a little bit confused by the lack of efficiency of such a large, complicated apparatus of institutions among the EU. And for the Asian countries, I think there are also reasons. The Asian countries, especially China, they are not familiar with how the Western media are functioning, and they lack the experience to deal with the media. I can speak for my experience in China. The local officials up to now are still very reluctant to grant interviews to Western media. So it is a problem on both sides. And also there are risks added up to the difficult situations. Sometimes it is not my personal feelings. I also have some discussions with the diplomats resident here, and they also find out it is the reality right now that the member states of the EU get benefits sometimes in the intercourses with other countries beyond the EU, whereas EU institutions play the tough guy. It means that in their relations with other countries out of the EU, member states will all say the good things, and they get the benefits, whereas they leave the the core things, the fights, to the EU institutions. And sometimes we found that issues difficult to get through at the EU level, and easier to get through at the member states level. And this, in the end, will weaken the credibility and impact of the EU institutions in the Asian countries. And there are also some other risks I would like to quote from Professor Okay, it's working now. He talked about the commercial and the strategic rivalry among the big three members of the EU: France, UK, and Germany. As I mentioned earlier, the solar panel tariffs might be interpreted as the EU sending out wrong signals of trade protection. And the EU failed to take the lead in open market and in open market rules and global issues. So these are all the risks that might undermine EU's image among the Asian media. And we certainly noticed that up to now there are a strong tendency, at least among the Western media themselves, the suspicions of EU's integration. I think if that is true, it will also undermine the future image of EU in the eyes of Asia. So what will be the solutions? I could be very brief here. I think the EU, for the EU itself, it needs to stand firm in its integration. It needs to demonstrate to the outside world that it stay diversified but united. And it will overcome the current economic difficulties and rebuild a strong and robust economy. And that's the most important thing. And as well, the EU needs to strengthen its role of the institutions, because sometimes we almost find that we often find out that the most dangerous enemy may come from within. I would like to quote what Rasmussen said a few days ago when he was actually talking about the security issues to the EU. He said that soft power alone for EU is no power at all. I know that he's talking about defense issues, but I believe that for a country to or an organization to stay strong and present a positive image to the outside world, it needs to stay strong itself. Otherwise, the image building will be just whitewashing. So if the EU stay divided instead of united, keep out sending wrong signals, and fail to set an example of the rules of open market, it will be very dangerous for the future. So what measures can we take to ensure that we can get a better, to send a better message out? I think for the EU, the image building will be involving the EU stay committed to act as, apart from the self-building, it will demonstrate to the outside world it stay committed to act as an active and constructive player in Asia, and it needs to demonstrate to Asian partners that it would like to share expertise and experience with the Asian partners, because everybody knows that Europe is famous for its science and technology and innovation and green technology. And for China, right now we are embarking the way of urbanization. I think that this is where we can learn from Europe as well. I think the best thing for us is that we can have some specific projects in this kind of cooperation, and that will showcase to the Asian audience that EU is really a helping force for Asia. And for those, for other things like human rights and traditional things, the EU would like to be a teacher for China and other Asian countries. We would like to say that to be more patient and to be more tolerant. We would like to be students. We would like to learn from the European countries, but could you please be a good teacher? And my other suggestion would be like we can make better use of the existing mechanism. We have a lot of bilateral mechanism. The summit meetings, for example, I can give you some examples of the cooperation between China and the EU. We have the bilateral summit meetings. We have the high-level dialogue, strategic dialogue, economic dialogue, and we have the people-to-people exchange mechanism as well. And for Europe and Asia, we have the ASEM mechanism. How many of them of us are familiar with these mechanism? I think ASEM is also not very visible in both Europe and Asia, but we can make better use of these mechanisms. We can also have better cooperation in a larger perspective, like in the G20. We can also combine those very important events, because when the high-level officials, especially the heads of states, are getting together, these are very good opportunities for the media to report and to influence the audience. So we can combine all the events together and to get a better media coverage during that time. Well, we also need to further expand people-to-people exchange. We can facilitate contacts and exchanges, especially between universities. That is the reason I'm especially happy to see so many university students here today. Because when they get back to their home country, they can be the ambassadors for both Europe and Asia. And we can also encourage the establishment of a systematic and comprehensive exchange program targeted at journalists and media students. Maybe we can have some internship in the EU institutions to targeted media students. We can provide them this kind of scholarship and internship for them to work in the EU institutions so that they can better learn the EU institutions given the complexity of the institutions themselves. And we can also organize media tours, both the EU and Asian countries. We can invite media representatives from the other side. We arrange tours for them to help them to understand more. And we can also, I noticed that not long ago, I guess it's on the 4th of May, the EU has had its Open Day event. I think it's a very good opportunity to help people to learn better how EU functions. And I guess that maybe in the future we can ask the EU institutions office in Asian countries to organize the same kind of events in the resident countries as well. And maybe, if I'm not asking more, maybe we can have some Asian targeted at Asian audiences, especially made for the Asian audience to visit the EU institutions in the future. And finally, I think the most important thing as well, the media cooperation is very important. We should encourage media organizations from both sides to have better cooperation and exchanges. They can maybe have more dialogue. They can have exchange programs. The exchange maybe switch journalists. I'm not sure about the feasibility, but maybe they can share columns in their different programs, and maybe they can, for television or radio, they can have certain period of time, a span for each other's programs. These can help the audience in their own destinations to get a better idea. And then finally, let me conclude by saying that the tendency right now is optimistic, because if you take a look at how many journalists foreign journalists in China, you will see that up to this point there are more than 691 foreign journalists from 59 countries are now resident posted in China. And in Brussels, we have more than 30 Chinese journalists posted here. And most of the Chinese news agencies have shifted their European center to the Brussels. So I think these are good things for the EU, so that the Chinese audience in the future will have increasingly knowledge and information about the EU. And just to mention that before I conclude, how many of you have ever looked at the back of the euro? If you haven't, you will see that on each this kind of note, the back of this kind of note, you will find a bridge. I think the idea is that the EU is actually a bridge between the members of the EU themselves and the EU and the outside world. I think it is correct that today we are having this event. We are actually trying to be this bridge, and I'm very happy that I can be part of this endeavor. Thank you.
I must say I really enjoyed your presentation, and I can also say that I agree with you on quite many points. I'll try to elaborate a bit, but before I begin, I'll introduce myself. My name is Maja Kocijancic. I'm the spokesperson for a High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, who is also Vice President of the European Commission, Catherine Ashton. I'm a Slovenian by nationality, so one of representatives of the member states that joined not so long ago. And maybe especially because of that, I'm a great believer in the European Union and what the European Union can do. But as a professional in this role, I also know that there are many challenges, especially when it comes to the field that I'm dealing with, which is communication. In terms of communication for the European Union, I think, broadly speaking, we can speak about two main challenges which are go across the board, so not only define our communication efforts when it comes to Asia and partners in Asia, but more broadly speaking. First is the one that was already mentioned, our very complicated institutional setup. It's complicated for us as well, and to explain it to the partners in the third countries is particularly challenging, especially taking into account that it's very difficult to explain it to the citizens of the European Union itself. So this is a challenge that we are very, very much aware of, and we are currently actually actively addressing. And of course, it wasn't made particularly easier with the latest treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, which actually strived to make it considerably easier, but still didn't make it simpler in a way that it would be more easy to understand for a general public. So in a way, this is defining our work, and it has an additional complication when it comes to our communication with third partners, because everyone, of course, expects that we speak on behalf of the European Union. And when we are at home, we, of course, have different institutions and people actually that are speaking on behalf of the European Union are also representing these institutions. So internally, this is a particular challenge. The way we are trying to address it is that we have a very clear division of role on the top, and that we are trying to actively promote this role and make, instead of rather speaking, we are trying to make the idea of speaking with one voice on all these, on all the issues that we deal with, into an idea of speaking with one very clear message, but still delivered by several high EU representatives. The reason is very simple, that the world is very big, and that we have very many partners, and we have to consistently and appropriately communicate to all of them at all times. That's I would say, a general challenge. When I come to the foreign policy, which is the field that I'm working for as the spokesperson for the High Representative, it's also defined by the fact that the Lisbon Treaty also gave us not only a new institution, but very important service, the European External Action Service. That is the service that in very simple, in layman's terms, can be understood as the Foreign Ministry of the European Union. That's the easiest explanation, but of course, I'm sure that I would find many people who would immediately say, yo, this is not really the case. I'm still, when I talk to general audiences, that's how I always try to explain. And for us, in communication, it gives us a very important opportunity to speak with one voice when it comes to the relations with third partners, including partners in Asia. Then the second, I think, major challenge was also already mentioned, which is the economic and the financial crisis. Which is now not really a surprise. It has completely dominated the media landscape, not only in Brussels, but in European Union and beyond its borders. Obviously, when the crisis has started, it was impossible to assess or predict the impact that this will have on the perception of Europe in the world and the challenges that we as communication professionals will be faced with. But here we are a few years later, and this is very much a reality. It's a reality in two ways. First of all, it has completely overtaken the interest of everyone, especially, let's say, accredited journalists and correspondents in Brussels. So I would say that in most cases, 85 to 90% of their time and of what they need to do is simply report about various aspects and little developments in the context of this crisis, which has, of course, taken attention away from other issues, including the foreign policy, relations with third countries. And the second issue linked to this is the fact that the European Union, as I mentioned before, internally is very complex. And in terms of communication, this was a particular challenge because, of course, the interest for the crisis went well beyond the European borders. And as the European Union, especially at the beginning of the crisis, we weren't really properly equipped with the tools to communicate to large audiences in third countries in a language that they would understand, with clear messages that would make it very, very straightforward and very, very clear on what we are trying to do and how we are facing the crisis, and how basically there is no reason to doubt into the capacity and the strength of the European economy, which was the underlying issue we had to deal with. So basically these are the two, I would say, very broad challenges that very importantly define also our communication efforts when it comes to communicating to Asia, with Asia and with our Asian partners. Now, what we are faced with when it comes specifically to Asia. First of all, maybe just to explain that the European Union, in policy terms, has very quickly after the Lisbon Treaty came in force, and on the basis of which we had to define the foreign policy priorities for the next foreseeable period. We have very quickly defined the strategic with strategic partners, relations with strategic partners as our as one of our key priorities. This, of course, includes Asia. It includes Asia as a whole, but also as individual countries, in particularly, of course, China, but it goes well beyond China. And in line with this new focus on Asia, I think we already started to adjust the way how we communicate. First of all, in terms of what we do in headquarters, you mentioned that the number of Asian journalists in Brussels is rising, and this is indeed the case. It's probably the number of proportionately the highest raising number of the foreign correspondents coming to Brussels. Because of the crisis, the many correspondents from member states had to really cut or make their offices smaller. So the number of European correspondents in Brussels has gone down, but the number of foreign correspondents, including Asian, has grown. Which of course is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. The second issue that is also very important to understand, and is again linked to what the Lisbon Treaty has given us, we have reinforced the communication efforts via our delegations. Delegations that we have all over the world, 140 of them, have become crucial in these communication challenges. Why is that? With the Lisbon Treaty, the delegations have become the delegations of the European Union, whereas in the past they have been only the delegations of the European Commission, which means that effectively their role was reinforced, because now head of the EU delegation is really the highest EU representative in a specific third country, and is fully empowered to address a broad scope of issues and challenges the European Union is faced with. At the same time, we have also reinforced our outreach activities on the ground, because simply we have realized that communicating centrally doesn't really cover the efforts and doesn't really correspond to what we are trying to do. So we have reinforced the efforts of on the ground in specific countries, and I can proudly say that we have the delegations in almost all Asian countries. Then the third point, I think was already also mentioned, which is that we are really trying to build our efforts around high-level meetings and the summits that we very regularly hold with our partners in Asia. And I think a very good thing is that they alternate between the continents, so that they are alternatively held either in Asia and then again in Europe, which is actually helping to build a bridge and makes it easier to communicate, because the longer you are actually following these events, the better your understanding. It actually grows with it, and it also brings many opportunities to build events, to build very concrete media work around it, like interviews, like speeches, or lectures, organization of exhibitions, and so on, which are actually a good way of making or helping us understand each other better. It's also an opportunity that is offered to all of us to discuss the issues that the issues where we have or we agree on, but also the more difficult sensitive issues. I think the another thing that is worth mentioning in this respect is that our representatives, and I'm not talking only about, let's say, the President of the European Council or the Commission or the High Representative, but also, for example, the commissioners, including the Trade Commissioner, travel around the world a lot and while they are communicating on policy, they are also using this as an opportunity to build the bridge. I think in terms of when it comes to communication challenges we are faced with in Asia, I'll try to sum them up in only the main ones. I think first of all, and the one that cannot be underestimated, is that we are dealing with a very large and very diverse audience. It's very difficult to send very clear messages and to address specific issues when the audience is that diverse. Of course, China is the key strategic partner, but this goes well beyond, again, China, and we well beyond the regional organizations that we are also very actively dealing with. I think the second issue is the one that I already mentioned as an internal challenge for the European Union. It's economic and the financial crisis. It's very clear that this is the number one concern of the partner countries in policy terms, but also in media terms. And it's very, very difficult to go beyond that, when journalists, when you travel, only want to know about these issues. We've made very conscious efforts to have a clear communication campaign on the issue of the crisis, but try to put it, try to build into this also the opportunities to talk about other issues. The second issue that is linked to the first one is that if we get the opportunity to discuss other issues with media, or where we get a significant media interest, are the individual issues of concerns, be it the trade issue, which comes very high on the issues of interest, I think probably very quickly after the economic crisis, and the issue of human rights, where individual cases attract a lot of concerns, both from the public in the European Union, but also in Asia itself. And then, again, an issue that was already mentioned is a limited knowledge and understanding of what the European Union is and what the European Union does, where it has a role, where it doesn't have a role, sometimes very unclear picture of what the member states are doing, what the European Union is doing, where the added value of the European Union comes in. This is something that we are very, very much aware of and are also very actively trying to address. Then I'll try to explain how we are doing that in quite concrete terms. We've tried to adjust the tools of communication that we use and combine it not just in a way. It's a combination of classical tools and modern public diplomacy tools that we hope will help to bridge the gap, which is, I mentioned the proactive work on the ground by our delegations on many different issues. And more proactive work here in the headquarters, because simply the Asian audience in Brussels is growing. I'll give you an example. In the last year, for example, we have organized a series of background briefings that address different issues that were Asia-related, and it has had a very good impact, and it attracted a lot of interest as well. So this is an avenue that we will continue to explore, because we believe that it can happen in a very informal way, but it helps to clarify different positions and increase the understanding. Then one of the tools that we use a lot are statements and communications, but they would often come as very clear policy messages, and policy messages that are distributed not only here, but also, again, on the ground in local languages, which we believe is a key to successful communication, so that we can come closer to different audiences we have in Asia. Obviously, various public remarks, I mentioned speeches, but one that is not to be neglected are different speeches given in the European Parliament, which is the democratically elected institution of the European Union, where very many concerns all across the board would come up in a public fora, in which we actively address, but are trying to address from various angles to increase the understanding. Then the classical tools that you all know, like press releases, like fact sheets, and so on. And then finally, one important tool that we are trying to use more and more are the social media, the new and social media, which I think offer a good opportunity to address not only the audiences, the audience at large, but also the media. And I must say, have had a very good experience with that, and are really trying to build on this, and also build on this again on various levels, not only here, let's say with the European External Action Service Twitter account, or the European Commission one, but also our delegations on the ground are doing this in a much more tailor-made way. Let's say our delegation in Beijing has the Weibo account that is actually growing in numbers extremely, extremely quickly. So basically, these are, in a way, the way we are trying to address the challenges and make sure that if there is anything that can be done, we are actually trying to do. Then to conclude, yes. To conclude very quickly, where I think opportunities ahead lie. I think we've all recognized and accept that our economies are interlinked. I think there is more work to be done when it comes to political association and cooperation in other areas. And I think this approach in terms of policy has to be supported in communication efforts as well. Secondly, with the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union has gotten an important tool to kind of start building a more comprehensive policy, and this is very important when it comes to relations with third partners, because it gives us a good platform to discuss and address many issues in a more understandable way. And then finally, one opportunity that I find particularly challenging is the rise of the Asian media in global terms. We all know CNN, we all know BBC, we know that with the Arab Spring, the Arab media has really grown. For example, the importance of Al Jazeera on Al Arabiya, and with this, in my view at least, gives us an opportunity to understand each other better and see if there are ways on how we can build the relationship on also through the media. So I'll stop at this point. I try to kind of cover the ground that I thought was important, but wasn't very competently covered by my colleague before. I hope I wasn't too long. And I think, Nawab, the turn is yours.
My name is Nawab Khan. I'm a journalist from India, based in Brussels since the last 12 years. Now I'm, as I said, the former two speakers were officials, but I'm a journalist, so I'm going to speak my mind and also be brief. I agree with some of them what they said, totally disagree what some of them what they said. But of course that I will leave to the Q&A. Here, before I start my presentation, I would like to pay tribute to one of the pioneers of the EU-India media relations, and he is the late Mr. Malcolm Subhan, and he is one of the founders of this institute where we are sitting. He, for about 4 decades, he was writing for the Indian media, major Indian media outlets on EU relations, and plus he was teaching about EU-India relations, and I learned a lot from him. So I just like to add this. Now I will, as I said, I will brief in my presentation, and I will present to you here that a practical bridge which was built here in Brussels, and this is called this was actually called INEP, India News in Europe program. And I have some copies, you all can take it if you want. Now I will tell you, I will just speak briefly what it was about. This was a project which began actually in 2004. And as all good things must end, it also ended in 2006. So this was only a 2-year project funded by the European Commission. And I was the editor-in-chief of this project. Now the main aim and object of this project was to raise the profile of the European Union in India, and also to promote relations between EU and India, media relations. Now in this 2 years, we organized visits of Indian journalists to Brussels and plus European journalists to India. So since I am a journalist and I forget things, I have to go back to my notes and see how much, see to that. We were sending actually about 50 news items per week. 50 news items per month to the Indian media. And we had about 300 Indian media subscribers. Of course, the service was for free, and it was actually a joint project with the Maastricht-based European Journalism Center and the International Federation of Journalists in Brussels and the National Union of Journalists in India. So we used to send about 50 news items every month, trying to project and raise awareness of the European Union in India. And I myself was invited several times to India to speak on what the EU is. Now briefly I'll just touch here, and maybe later we can. The main problems that I noticed the Indian media faced in understanding the European Union was first that Brussels is unknown. For an Indian public, we had relations with the UK, and we know Italy and France and Germany, but Belgium and Brussels, unfortunately not well known. And I will tell you what happened. Example, we can laugh over this, but it happened in fact with me when I was speaking at an audience in Chennai, in Madras. And the person who was introducing me said that this is Mr. Nawab Khan from London, Brussels. So again he said, this is Mr. Nawab Khan from London, Brussels. So I asked him, friend, what do you mean by that? He said, but Brussels is a suburb of London. So this was so much was unknown about Brussels. And some of the major problems which already mentioned is the very difficult setup of the European Union. To inform them what is the European Commission, what is the European Council, the European Parliament, and why it moves over to Strasbourg every month. And recently with the crisis, all these new acronyms coming up, EFSF and the ESM and the 2-pack and the 6-pack, I myself, I'm 12 years here. It is difficult for me to understand. So how can I explain it to my readers, in India? The second point I will come here is that I do not very much agree here with my colleagues what they said, that the numbers of Asian correspondents here are increasing, maybe from China. But from India, we were 2, and I'm the only one left now who writes, but I'm writing for the Kuwait News Agency, very seldom. So, and even from a country like Pakistan, I think there are 2, 3. From major countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka, nobody. And recently, after the economic crisis, I think some of them have even left. So, what I would think that what can be done. Let me come here also to the problems here in the Indian media. Major Indian papers have only 1 or maybe 2 pages of foreign news, maybe 1 or mostly 1. And most of these news are covered by the region, the Pakistan, what's happening in Bangladesh, the regional news. So there's very little space left for European Union. And another major problem is that the Indian public or the Indian even policy makers today look at the European Union only as a trading bloc, only as an economic bloc. And if you have noticed the presentation presented here from our Chinese official, that most of it was focused on trade issues. So this concept of the European Union being only an economic bloc still exists in the minds, Although India and EU signed in 2004 a strategic partnership, but it's only on paper. Most of the news is focused on the US economics. And there is also a reason for that. Now, Maya, of course, we meet her every day and we listen to her briefings. You see, most of the issues like in the Middle East or developments or whatever happened in Asia, I'm talking about foreign policy issues. The statements which come out from Brussels comes out after it is published in Washington. And if you are careful, you see even the wordings are nearly the same sometimes. So the people, in our part of the world are saying that when, the concept is also that the European Union doesn't have an independent foreign policy. Most of its foreign policies are linked or subjected to US policy. And this is very clear. I don't think anyone can dispute that. You can see it in the Middle East. See what happened in Libya, what's happening now in Syria. So these are the issues that people are saying, as Mayu said, what is the added value of the European Union? What is the added value? Another point which I would like to bring here to your attention is that when European leaders visit, whether it's India or other Asian countries, you see, they talk of like Germany's relations with India. Mr. Cameron goes to India, British-India relations. Or the French leaders go French-India. There's hardly any talk of EU-India relations. So the Indian Unions say when they themselves are not talking about the EU, why should we bother? See, so this added value of the EU has to be explained, what it is. And I think, we tried to do that in our project. We tried to show to them that, look, most of the, for example, regulations and rules regarding trade issues are being made here in Brussels. But again, it's trade. As I said, it's economics and trade. So, really to change the concept, there has to be change in the EU itself, in the structures, in policy making. I would not like to take much of your time here. I'll stop here and we can have a debate on that. Okay?
Thank you very much.
It's always tricky to speak, to be the last speaker, because a lot of things have been already told. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Richard Worley. I'm working for a Swiss newspaper, so a newspaper from a country which is in the heart of the European Union, but not a member of the European Union, as you may know. By nationality, I'm French and Swiss. I've been here for the last 6 years. Actually, my mandate is finishing in a few months' time, and I'll be back in Geneva covering Europe and Asia, because I've been for 15 years in Asia. I've been correspondent in Tokyo, I've been in Hong Kong, and I've been in Bangkok. So I'm quite familiar with the region, though I left it in 2003. Let me grab some point, not on what was said, because I think questions will come at a later stage, but maybe on kind of recommendation on how to bridge the gap. So the first question, the first point I'd like to make is that there is a gap and the gap will remain. So let's not, believe that we can bridge this gap. Europe and Asia are different continents. The perception are very different. The priorities are different. So the gap will always be there. So the question is not so much to me to bridge this gap, but to make both parties understand what the gap is and be sure that what you are doing is correctly perceived in the other part of the world. The first point I would say, and especially in this time of social media, new technology or communication, is use opportunities. I don't believe that much nowadays into communication strategy, and I personally think that's where the EU has got it completely wrong. And when I'm talking about the EU, I'm talking about the European Commission. What strategy? What is important is reactivity in today's time. Whatever strategy you may have on visibility for the EU, blah, 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 which I think is nice, and it's actually, giving jobs to a number of people. And it's important to be there. But the real strategy that you should have is to be reactive and to communicate when it is necessary and to use the opportunities to communicate well. So I think it's very important to emphasize on this reactivity need. So let's focus a little bit. My advice to my European colleagues, and Maya has been a superb spokesperson for Lady Ashton, but focus less on strategy and be more reactive and feed us with the news we need when we need them, and not tomorrow or after tomorrow, or not next week, or not next month. That would be my first advice. Secondly, recognize the facts. The facts are there. Stop. As far as the EU is concerned, and I'll be talking here from an EU perspective, stop selling crap to Asians. Stop telling them that the EU is a superb social model. Stop telling them that the EU integration is a success. In Asia, and you here, I think, are certainly a proof of it, you know perfectly that the EU integration is not working that well, that the EU social model is nearly bankrupt, that the EU is looking for money whenever and wherever it comes from. So those are the facts. I'm not telling you, let not be confused. I'm not saying that the EU belongs to the past. I actually completely share Maya enthusiasm for the European Union, and I'm among those in Switzerland who regret that Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. But still, I mean, stop selling crap to an audience who know perfectly what's going on. I was based in Asia in the end of the 80s. At that time, I was based in Bangkok. At that time, 20 years ago, you could tell the Thai, the Vietnamese, and all those people in Southeast Asia that the EU was a superb dream. But it's over now. They know it is not. And especially when they come to Brussels, I mean, they expect to find a wonderful capital of Europe, while this city is actually pretty ugly, dirty, and definitely not up to date with the standards of the Asian cities I know of. So that's a simple fact, and let's speak truly to each other. I always quote this anecdote, and I think I told it here before in a panel. I just arrived in Brussels, that was 6 years ago, when friends from Hong Kong visited me. And they were thinking of visiting the capital of Europe. And for them, it was to be a superb capital of Europe with Gucci, Armani, whatever they sing and they associate with Europe. And they arrive in the Gare Centrale, which is Brussels Central Station. And at that time, it had not been renovated yet. It was full of graffiti, whatever. It was looking like the Bronx in New York, you know. And they called me, they were completely panicking. They were asking me, is this the capital of Europe, or is it another city called Brussels? Well, we may not like it. Rond-Point Schuman, which is over there, which is the heart of the European Union, where Maya has her office, I have my office, Nawab has his office. I mean, it's actually completely ugly. It looks like the heart of Pristina in Kosovo. So this is where you bring people to. Well, Pristina is uglier than Brussels, I admit. But really, what I mean is, in Asia today's people, and that's a fact, are expecting cities to represent the countries. There is a lot, I mean, the cities in Asia are, you know, kind of the showcase for the countries, with nice towers, nice buildings. You may not like skyscrapers, but they see cities as showcase. What are the showcases we have for the European Union in Brussels? So this is a question that rings a bell. Nowadays, for those of you who read French, there is a bit of controversy. Maya probably knows it, about a story published in Libération newspaper, the French newspaper, about Brussels, precisely saying that the city is getting in decay and the city is deteriorating. Well, I do not agree completely with that, but there is a controversy going on. So the Brussels equation should come, and I think is important. Another 2 or 3 points. Trust people when it comes to information, when it comes to communication. Trust people, not trust process. And there is this tendency in the EU to trust process. We're going to launch a public diplomacy program, whatever, in a country, and that will be a process, and so on. Trust people, and I would address it to Maya directly. There are Asian experts within the EU diplomacy who deserve positions in Asia. I will not quote name here because it will be quite unfair, but I can tell you that when you are a journalist, it makes a huge difference to have an EU ambassador who knows the region where he is based, or who knows the country where he is based. There are absolutely splendid people working for the EU, but very often, and it's true also for national diplomacies, by the way, but very often they are not sent where they should be sent. And so trust people. When you have people who are good in Asia, who know Asia, well, send them to Asia. And I know it's difficult because you have the human resource equation, but it makes a difference to have in Asia some diplomats who know the region, who've been there, and they know how to explain. And I know that some embassies in Asia are coming up, and I hope that the people who will be designated to go there representing the EU will be people who have familiarity with the Asian region. Choose your subject, and I think Nawab touched upon that. Choose your subject and maybe stop talking that much about economy, and I'm completely right. Try to talk about other things. And one thing I notice here, I understand you are students for communication, mostly ladies. I do not see many men. So apparently communication is a woman matter, and I think it matters. It matters, and I would say, look at what Asian women would like to hear about the EU. I mean, frankly speaking, on a pure kind of communication aspect, I would say, what does the young generation of Asian women, because for those of us who are in Asia, we know that you will be taking the lead in the coming years. It's incredible. I mean, the power, the woman empowerment in this part of the world. So let's talk with this generation of young women and to know what they would like to hear about the EU. And I don't know personally, so I'd like to know, and I'd like some research to be done on that. Because I'm not sure you, young women from those emerging countries, you want to hear the same thing about the EU than young men. I mean, the subjects are different. And last point, and it always pays in terms of communication, be contrarian. I mean, say something different to what the political correctness is kind of saying and telling everywhere. I would say just one point, and I would end up here. At the moment, it's not true that much for China, but it's very much true for Southeast Asia. The stocks market are going like crazy in Southeast Asia. Indonesia booming, Thailand booming, Vietnam booming. This is a dream. They are going into a wall, and they are going to repeat the crisis of '98, and it will end up once Europe goes better, because the capital flight, the money which has been going to Asia will come back to Europe. No doubt about it. Money at the moment is in Asia because it makes more profit than it makes in Europe, but it will come back. Who is saying that? Nobody. I mean, let's tell our Asian friends, I mean, your dream is not a miracle. It was not a miracle yesterday, and it's not a miracle today. You're just partly taking advantage of the bad situation of Europe. But when Europe will recover, and it will recover, money will come back, and you'll be left with difficulties as well. So be contrarian, be optimistic about Europe, that would be my advice. But also tell sometime Asia, do not believe into your dream, because they are dreams.
Hi everyone, if you really liked this video, then make sure you subscribe here and make sure you never miss out on one.